Peace, peace, peace. I am Dr. Philip Roundtree, and you are tuned into the January 8th edition of Rhetorically Speaking. This is the first Rhetorically Speaking of the new year, so salute to you all for tuning in. Happy New Year, or for those of you who say New Year's, because there's some of y'all out there too, and no shade, right? Because this ain't our official language, so we could say whatever we want to say. Happy New Year and Happy New Year's to you and yours. Salute to those of you who are watching on YouTube. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. I know it's somewhere at the bottom of here, and the like button, that's the little thumbs up. So make sure you hit those two things. Also, you can leave a comment and it can say whatever you want it to say. I don't necessarily read them anyway, but you know who likes who likes when you leave comments? The algorithms. Now, I don't necessarily care about that. It's 2024. I'm 40 years old now, so I could tell the truth. I care about the algorithm. I do. Why? Because I want people to see this. I see a lot of nonsense out there, and I see a lot of dope stuff out there that doesn't necessarily get the respect and the viewership that it deserves. And I think this is one of them. So if you cool with me, if you like me, even if you don't like me, just make sure you hit the button so the algorithm can get it popping. Again, we telling the truth in 2024. I'm not Cat Williams with it, but we still telling the truth in 2024. And I haven't read 3,000 books, but I digress. So on a more serious topic, and I've been sitting and waiting to have this conversation for about the last week. Unfortunately, I've been ill due to COVID. Once I got over COVID, now apparently I have the flu. I'm sounding a little bit nasally, so it's just like, you know what? Let me just wait till I'm a little bit better to have this conversation. And the conversation we're having is regarding now former Harvard president Claudine Gay's resignation last week after less than 6 months in that role. Now, when I first saw the story, I was just like, resignation, that don't feel right. That don't feel like the right word. It's not like, okay, I'm resigning to go do something else with my life. There's no forces impacting my resignation. So I hit the Googles up. And I said, hey, Google, because that's what we do over here on the Android side. I said, hey, Google, what is a forcible resignation called? And Google didn't let me down. Google said it's called a constructive discharge, which is a forced resignation due to a hostile work environment. And I said, oh, then that's what it is. Because we know Claudine Gay's resignation or constructive discharge wasn't her own doing, but was a result of a hostile work environment created by designers, donors, and governmental entities. So I thought it was important that we first establish that, right? We needed to establish that because language is important. Language shapes how we view so much. And I think it's apropos for the conversation that we're about to have. And so once we got the language down that it was a constructive discharge, I then wanted to take a look at the timeline of her in her role as Harvard president, specifically when shit hit the fan. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at this timeline, which led to her constructive discharge. So starting back in July, she became the first black president of Harvard University. And I give her a golf clap because clearly that's an achievement that she desired. Right? It's what white folk call a meteoric rise, because she'd only been at Harvard for 16 years. Now, when we think about black folk who've been deemed exceptional Negroes, right, I often wonder about what part of themselves are sacrificed to take on such responsibilities. And so in Claudine's case, she took over as president at a university with historical ties to what? Let's count them. Slavery, eugenics being taught, and recent instances of racial profiling. Anytime I hear Harvard, I think about 2009 when Henry Louis Gates was arrested for breaking into his home. Yeah, you heard me. He was arrested for allegedly breaking into his home. Or that's what the white folk called and said. Hey, this suspicious man is breaking into this crib. And he was subsequently put in handcuffs. He had to prove that he had stayed there. I encourage you to go and listen to Rhapsody. Rhapsody is one of my favorite rappers, and she talks about this on Eve, which is the intro to is the album Eve? I think the album is Eve, but it's on in the single. The intro might be called Eve as well. But either way, go talk about it. She has a bar in there where she talks about Henry Louis Gates being arrested, profiled at his own home. This took place at Harvard. I also think about last year in 2023, where 4 black students were swatted and held at gunpoint by police. Yes, this is happening. No, there aren't congressional hearings being held for individuals who are being arrested at their home. Black folk being arrested at their home, or black folk being swatted by police. Or, well, clearly by their peers, to have police come and hold them at gunpoint. But ultimately, to lead and attend a university like Harvard, you must believe that the state institution and the HBCU are intellectually inferior, right? And to buy into this white supremacist notion of exceptionalism that continues to stand the test of time. And so what I'm saying is, yes, Claudine Gay has bought into this idea of being the exceptional Negro to not only teach at Harvard, leaving another place in Stanford, but to go on and become president at that university. And if you don't believe in it, this idea of exceptionalism, then why would somebody subject themselves to the continuous psychological and emotional torture at these places? And so you may say, Phil, you've attended 4 predominantly white institutions and you teach at one. Aren't you being contradictory? And what I'll say to that is, I'll say that that's a fair question, right? Fair question. You know what? They fooled me in undergrad. Right? They fooled me in undergrad. When I left high school, there was a conversation about HBCUs or predominantly white institutions. It was just, hey, go to college. But like the late, great Paul Mooney said, listen, I got my nigga wake up call on Bloomsburg University's campus, right? Where myself and my peers and those who came after me have had to navigate things like police violence, who've had front row seats to rampant anti-blackness and Islamophobia at that time. And so, yeah, I can admit to myself that I sacrificed aspects of myself, most notably comfort, to be in these spaces and to be educated in these spaces, and to be an educator in these spaces. Listen, I'm most comfortable at the Negro University. All right. It's a reality. Because there's an unspoken understanding that exists, which is rooted into what I'll call just diasporic culture that doesn't necessarily require talking. It's those feelings when you just chilling with somebody who looks like you, and something might take place, so you just give them that. You don't even gotta say nothing. It's understood. It's what they call in the Africana Studies conceptual framework, that governance conversation. And this exists, right, outside of the African diaspora. Because we know culture goes from the micro to the macro. And so there's a level of safety that exists there, right? That doesn't require talking, as opposed to the white university. Now, don't get me wrong. Listen, I enjoy teaching non-black students, but I'm also hyper aware of who I am. I'm hyper aware of who I am, where I am, and what I am in these spaces that I inhabit. I also don't find myself getting too comfortable at these institutions, which thrives because of capitalism. Listen, I'm not taking my shoes off and going to the fridge without permission at these places. That's not the level of comfort that I can have there. All right? Because one day you're the best thing since pants with pockets, and the next thing you out of here. Like Claudine Gay. But I digress. And that's one beautiful thing about recording. When it's recording and things start to pop off, you can pause it. This alarm was going crazy in the background. I don't know if you could hear it, but if you did, my apologies. So listen, when we get back to this timeline, which resulted in the discharge, right? What do we call it? The constructive discharge of Claudine Gay from Harvard. The writing was on the wall starting on October 7th. And listen, I'm not going to get into you know what? We're here, right? We're here. So we know what really sped up Claudine Gay's constructive discharge was what took place on October 7th and her response to it, right? So on October 7th, a coalition of student groups at Harvard released a statement which allegedly spoke to Israel being to blame for Hamas's attack. Now, when we think about, first, let's go back a little bit. Claudine Gay was named Harvard president back in July of 2023. Okay? And I look at the presidency for black folk at these universities like I look at coaches in sports. You're hired to get fired. If you are non-white, you are hired to get fired. And so, no, nobody thought it was going to be within 6 months. But a place like that, in a space like that, is not sustainable to the well-being of black folk, because they will turn on you at some point. All right. And so with that being said, it started on October 7th, where again, a coalition of students released a statement which allegedly spoke to Israel being to blame for Hamas's attack. Fast forward to October 10th, 3 days. 3 days. Recognizing who was attacked. And I don't put attack because clearly it was an attack. But knowing, again, reading between the lines, knowing who was attacked. 3 days is a very long time to release a statement. And so like Claudine Gay, so like many other university presidents, Claudine Gay condemned the attack, but many didn't feel as if her condemnation was strong enough or, again, timely enough, right? The Zionist donors of the university began to bail. And so at this point, the writing should have been on the wall. This was and has been a watershed moment for many nationally and internationally. And so just by the sheer nature of her role, she's forced to navigate the thoughts, feelings, and emotions of students, administrations, and donors, with the latter being the most powerful, as Harvard prides itself. They pride themselves on having one of the largest endowments in academia. And so you would think she would have known, or her second in command, or her right hand would have said, listen, Claudine, listen, you got to get this up out. You got to get something out. Not only about what took place in Palestine, I guess, / Israel, and responding to this coalition of students. And so heavy is the head that wears the crown. Because again, she's navigating students, administration, donors, so many. But this is what you desire to have. Again, heavy is the head that wears the crown. It's She needed to pick a side, and she didn't, which brought about more scrutiny. So again, if you believe in what I believe, which is that the university, the only thing that matters at the university in theory are the students and the educators. That's it. Now everything else helps facilitate that relationship. So when we get into administration, when we get into the donors, again, in theory, it's supposed to be about the learners and the educators. This could have been one of those teachable moments for those that keep this university afloat. If you disagreed with their statement, if you disagreed with their approach, this could have been a teachable moment where you wouldn't necessarily have to castigate anybody. You would think, right? But you know what? She did. And so that's her prerogative. Now we're going to fast forward a bit to November 28th. And this really began, got that, we talk about that the proverbial ball going downhill, destroying everything in its path. That's what October 7th was, and that's what was to follow. And so the Department of Education began an investigation into Harvard and other universities like Penn, like MIT, for what they called discrimination involving shared ancestry. Okay? Discrimination involving shared ancestry. And so that encompasses Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. Although I haven't necessarily seen a congressional hearing regarding Islamophobia on its own. I haven't seen a congressional hearing about the rampant anti-blackness that takes place on every single college campus. But they opened this investigation, which again causes who to get involved? The government. Because why? We're talking, again, this is a watershed moment. Especially for a government who has their hands in the proverbial cookie jar. In the cookie jar is Israel. And they're steady putting cookies into that jar. Even if it ain't really their jar. They stole the jar. They stole the cookies. Anyway, so on December 5th, Claudine Gay and other university presidents, former University of Penn president, soon to be MIT president, they were grilled on anti-Semitism on their respective campuses. Right, so you had this representative Elise Stefanik of New York who asked Claudine if Harvard would take disciplinary actions against students or applicants who say from the river to the sea or intifada, which is the Arabic word for uprising. Again, remember, language matters, and who's defining the language matters. All right. And much like her colleagues at the time, her responses were what? They were unenthusiastic and they were middling for someone of her experience and knowledge. And so what she said was, she said that she saw the speech as quote unquote abhorrent and at odds with Harvard's values, but the school embraces free expression. And so me doing the due diligence that I try to do, I looked up from the river to the sea, right? And what immediately pops up, and again, we're not going to sit here and talk about, but we can talk about power and who has power. But when you look up from the river to the sea, what comes up in the Google search are definitions from Jewish-based organizations. Now, if you have any understanding, or if you've watched the evolution of Google searches, What doesn't come up anymore, like it once did, was your just basic websites from some random person in Idaho. Somebody's Medium from the layperson. No, what pops up are the big organizations, the individuals who pay to be listed at the top when you do searches for certain things. Because why? What happens then? You get the control. Things like the narrative, the understanding, the comprehension of ideas. I've been looking for some kitchen appliances. When I put in refrigerator, what comes up? Home Depot, Lowe's, not the mom and pop shop. You got to go about 30 to 40 pages to get to them. So think about how all of this is curated. But when you look up from the river to the sea, the Jewish explanation comes up. And not even necessarily, and I take that back, not the Jewish explanation, the Zionist explanation, because there's a difference. And they define it as wanting to erase, commit genocide, the same thing that's being done in Palestine, against all of those between the river and the sea. Even though some of their own historically have used it in a different manner. Or if they listen to Palestinian folk who say this is what we mean, we're talking about ending the occupation, ending the siege. Because no, we can't listen to them. Why? Because they're less than human. And so if we control the narrative, if we control the language, then we can control perception. Same thing with Intifada. Which is interesting, right? Because and I looked on one of the Zionist websites, and it says it's a call for a violent uprising against the state of Israel. Okay, if I reside in an open air prison where millions of people are being starved, thousands of people are being slaughtered, am I wrong for calling for a violent uprising against occupational forces? Oh, my bad. How do you want your freedom to look like? What you want your freedom to look like? It got to be pretty. It got to be, it's crazy. The oppressor choosing how the oppressed should fight for their freedom. Now, I'm not going to get into this, about the civilian aspect. Yeah, civilians, if you just walking down the street, you shouldn't be involved in nothing, right? You should be able to live freely. But for we talking about the state of Israel, for me and mine, hey, if that's what you, listen, you do what you got to do to survive, ultimately. All right? But again, whoever controls the language controls the narrative. So what Claudine Gay said was, she said, again, that the speech was abhorrent and it was at odds with Harvard's values, but the school embraces freedom of expression, which didn't sit well with lawmakers and with Jewish leaders, including those who worked at the university in some capacity. They wanted her about the pain. Despite multiple apologies, where she capitulated to the vocal condemnation levied against her. She went so far. She went as far as to say that she got caught up in the whirlwind that was testifying, the conversations about policies and procedures. So it's just like, yo, it was just too much for me. That reeks of desperation. Again, the writing is becoming clearer and clearer. But for many of us who are watching from the outside looking in, we knew what the end game was. Much like we know what the end game is, what Israel's end game is when it comes to Palestine. We want all of this shit. Even if we do nothing with it. Even though we're going to have some settlements, we're going to do some things, we're going to try to make it a nice little vacation spot for our people in Brooklyn and these other places to come in and inhabit. The great coming home. But we just don't want y'all to have it. Because why? You're less than. But Claudine says she got caught up in the whirlwind that was testifying. But again, she probably ain't even know it was going to get this big. She probably would have been better off saying, you know what, I'm out. But she kept fighting. Why? Because she is black. Right? And we know we endure. Hell, she wouldn't be in a position that she's in if her ancestors haven't endured. Even though I believe she comes from her ancestry comes from the Caribbean, that's still a matter of enduring. Because we know the game historically. So on December 9th is when the proverbial ish started to hit the fan. And this is what I found interesting, coming off the heels of a dissertation. Plagiarism accusations were levied against Claudine Gay by conservative activists, which is spearheaded by this billionaire Bill Ackman. Have no idea who he is. I have no desire to know who he is. But what does he have? He has whiteness. He has money, which is a dangerous combination. And so without evidence, he alleged that her work was fraudulent and she was merely a diversity hire. Now, what do we know this to be? We know that this is a dog whistle for racists, which is then magnified when it's Zionists supporting racists with disposable money. And so, again, money talks, influence talks, power or the perception of power talks. Subsequently, in the weeks to follow, Harvard announced that you know what, we're going to conduct an investigation. And what they found was they didn't find that there was research misconduct, but they acknowledged that there were some inadequate citations. And so having completed my dissertation, God forbid I ever want to be president at Harvard, which Lord knows I don't, and they go check my dissertation or any future work that may come out, we talking about, like AI said, we talking about practice, we talking about inadequate citations, which when we think about the time when she really was conducting her research and writing her articles, there wasn't these plagiarism systems out here, the chat GPTs or whatever exist to check and see what was AI generated and what have you. This was regular folk sitting in libraries, sitting there writing by hand. At this point, they had computers. But you're bound to have one or two misses. That's the human element when it comes to this thing called research. And then through the various hands, the committees that your work has to go through. To validate your work. So if she's submitting articles, they have to be peer reviewed by several people. And so this is a systemic issue. If this was able to get through this amount of hands. But again, we're not even talking about issues that should warrant an individual to have to resign or to be constructively discharged. We talking about some citations. Would she go on to request to make changes in some articles? And then more would come out and she would have to say, okay, you know what? Hey, you know what? I want to make some more changes. Heck, my dissertation, you know how many changes I've made thus far? And it's only been about 10 months at this point. I've literally made about 3 to 4 revisions just because I've went and gone back and reread some things. Wanted to make some changes. Because this is a body of work. It's a breathing body of work. And so, unfortunately, with the pressure mounting, on January 2nd, Claudine resigned and she cited racial animus and ultimately ended up returning to faculty within the university. And this is where I asked the question, why, Claudine, why? Why are you staying at Harvard? It's beyond my comprehension. But then I started to think about it again. Why do black folk go to Harvard? And the reasoning is, as I talked about, this idea of exceptionalism. You got to be the exceptional Negro to get to these spaces. It's how you differentiate yourself. As I heard Dr. Carr of Howard University say this past weekend, to which I agree, he said the university is a system where the concept of class is continuously upheld. So think about it, right? We talk about the universities that were present at this congressional hearing. You had Harvard, you had MIT, you had UPenn. What are they known for? Elite institutions. For whom? Well, for those, it's definitely for mediocre legacy white folk. And yeah, you got some intelligent white folks sprinkled in, but a lot of it is legacy. And then you get your few exceptional non-whites who I don't even know now, given what's taking place in the Supreme Court, when it comes to this overt attack on diversity at institutions, we're going to see those numbers dwindle. And so those are your elites, your upper class. And then you have your University of Michigans who fashion themselves in Ivy League. They're in that next tier where, again, you have what? You have your mediocre legacy whites and your intelligent white folk. You have more of your exceptional non-whites with a little sprinkle, a little dash, little Mrs. Dash of average non-whites mixed in. They're in that next tier. And then you got like your middle class, which are your state schools, right? And so that's for those who desire to like elevate from impoverished situations. We know that if you're born in the middle class, more than likely you're going to die in the middle class. But you might as well go get you this degree. And then after that, right? And we're looking at this from a social structure about how white folk view black folk. After the state schools, then you have your HBCUs, which is, again, through the lens of how white America views HBCUs, right? It's like on par with like your local community college, despite us recognizing that they produce the most black professional everything. And so for those of you who, like myself, who've worked at an HBCU, you recognize that there is a hierarchy there that upholds this white supremacist capitalistic mindset. You got your Howards and your Morehouses, right? That's the MIT, the UPenn of the Negro Institution. They fully lean into to capitalism. You'd be surprised. At these institutions, the only thing of black tradition are the faces that's there. Because everything else within the administration and how they approach things, you would think it's a white university. And so we recognize how the university upholds this class system. Now, with Claudine Gay, it's clear that she's also bought into this notion of black exceptionality. Otherwise, why would you stay at a place which left you out to dry for the entire world to see? How can you look your colleagues in the eye? Some of them who view you as anti-Semitic, unjustly viewing you as anti-Semitic, as they misconstrue your words and your intent. We watched Nicole Hannah-Jones leave UNC for Howard because she wasn't going to allow them to play in her face. Yet and still, here Claudine stands, unjustly as a face of anti-Semitism within the academic walls of an institution with firm footing in enslavement, anti-blackness, misogynoir, and so much more. For her, I hope it's worth it. But I think for many of us, we know that it's not. Listen, I appreciate you all for tuning in. Again, hit the subscribe button, the like button, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Should Claudine remain at Harvard? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, peace.